We are Rogue Media Sports.
Who doesn't love a classic chocolate chip cookie? Famous Amos has been making them since the 70s, 1975 to be exact. With semi-sweet chocolate chips and a satisfying crunch, it's everything classic in one bite-sized cookie, and fans couldn't get enough. That's right. You'll find our original recipe, the one you know and love, in every bag of Famous Amos original chocolate chip cookies. Find Famous Amos anywhere you buy your favorite snacks.
There are any number of reasons you might consider selling your home. To move closer to family, live within a smaller budget, or just wanting a change of scenery. Whatever your reasons, having to figure out all the various housing market trends in your area may not be what you signed up for. That's where an agent who is a realtor comes in. Realtors have the expertise to help you find the right price and navigate the process to sell your home in a way that's right for you. That's who we are. Realtors are members of the National Association of Realtors.
It is the Doomsday Podcast, a special NFL draft preview show, and Ed Werder joining me as he always does. We're in the Frito Nation studios out here in far, far North Dallas, and Ed on the precipice of history here as could be Kyler Murray, number one overall. Lots of rumors circulating today. We've got a lot to get to. I'm very excited to say that you have spoken to someone you covered early in your career with the Cowboys, and you're going to be bringing some incredible insight into something that happened 30 years ago that changed the fortunes of the Cowboys franchise forever.
Yeah, 30 years ago, 1989, my first year on the Cowboys beat for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. I was competing against the Dallas Morning News, an ominous task that not many writers are up to at the time. But actually...
Did you kick their rears, Ed? Be honest.
The first story I felt like I broke news on, covering the Cowboys beat, actually involved the situation we're going to talk about, which was the Cowboys drafting Troy Aikman number one overall, and then a couple of months later, in the first round of the supplemental draft, using a first-round pick on Steve Walsh, who not only played quarterback, but won a national championship as a quarterback for the new Cowboys coach, Jimmy Johnson. Well, this struck me as being as similar to the situation we see at the top of this draft tomorrow night with the Arizona Cardinals having the number one overall pick based on having the worst record in football, just as the Cowboys did, and presumably prepared to spend that pick on a franchise quarterback at number one in Kyler Murray, the Heisman Trophy winner, but having just spent the number 10 pick last year trading up to get another quarterback, Josh Rosen. So 30 years after the Cowboys screwed a UCLA quarterback, now 30 years later, Steve Keim, the general manager of the Arizona Cardinals, apparently set to screw yet another UCLA quarterback. And we're going to talk about that. I got Jimmy's perspective on the whole thing.
Jimmy Johnson, and then also one of the legends in NFL draft circles, certainly a guy who was given credit by Bill Belichick not that long ago in the aftermath of the another Super Bowl victory for helping him decide to take a look at Julian Edelman, a player who has been a huge part of the Patriots over the years and a big part of some of their Super Bowls, and that is Rick Goose Gosselin, a guy you've been a beat writer with over the years. We've both been good friends with, a guy I wrote with at the Morning News, and he has some incredible insight into all of these matters, and people, in fact, have been bringing up his name a lot lately. So we've got a power-packed show. Frito, please play the music. All right, and it is time for that NFL draft preview show that we do and we've done for a couple of years now on the Doomsday Podcast. Thank you so much for listening to this one. It's a very special one, and we got Goose Gosselin coming up next, and he'll be shedding a little light on not only this draft but a lot of the drafts in the past. But boy, as you alluded to off the top, Ed, this is a 30 years ago. Troy Aikman was drafted by the Cowboys out of UCLA, and boy, the rest is history, as they say. But you had a chance, Ed, to reach out to former Cowboys coach Jimmy Johnson, a man who belongs in the Ring of Honor with the Cowboys.
He was in
Although
the Broadcasting Hall of Fame just recently, but he's not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame and somehow not in the Cowboys Ring of Honor. I think we know how that somehow is.
Yeah, and until Jerry puts himself in there, I think he's going to have a hard time. Maybe they'll go in together someday, although these guys have a little bit too much testosterone, so to speak.
Dislike.
These are not
contempt.
These are not low T individuals. Yes, it's still there. Although there are moments, there are kind of softer moments, but you were able to Ed, reach out to Jimmy Johnson, someone that, for folks that don't know, you covered early in your time, with first the Star Telegram, and then over the Morning News, and you and Tim Calishaw hooked up. I believe you and the guy we're going to talk to a little bit later, you and Goose Gosselin had teamed up at one point with the Dallas Morning News. But what is Jimmy Johnson saying all these many years later about the draft and about that whole Troy Aikman-Steve Walsh situation in particular?
Well, I was trying to figure out a way. I mean, this is a hard draft for us to do, focusing on the Cowboys because they don't have a pick, having traded it to the Raiders for Amari Cooper until, 58th overall in the second round. So how could we, use our creative skills to bring some unique content? Because that's what I think we want to be known for here. And so I thought, well, what the Cardinals are contemplating with the first pick in the draft has really never happened. And it seems similar to what Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson did in their first draft 30 years ago. If the Cardinals draft Kyler Murray first overall and trade Josh Rosen, it would be historic. No quarterback in the first round has ever been traded after his first season, in his first offseason. The closest situation I think there is to that is the Cowboys drafting Steve Walsh in a supplemental draft and using a first-round pick just a few months after taking Troy Aikman first overall. So I reached out to Jimmy about it, and I asked him from his experience, what was that like? What was the dynamic of having two first-round quarterbacks on your roster? How did that affect the chemistry of the football team? How did it affect the relationship you had with your quarterback? And here's what he said. He said, just like draft picks, winning quarterbacks are valuable. He said, I knew Troy was our guy, but having Steve in a building year was a great asset. I was able to get a 1, 2, and a 3. Again, Jerry probably won't like that. That'll cost Jimmy 5 more years on the weight in the Ring of Honor. I was able to get a 1, 2, and a 3 for Steve from New Orleans. The biggest problem, he said, was walking a tightrope between the two of them because I didn't want to diminish Steve's trade value. Troy wasn't happy about it, but after I traded Steve, we worked it out. I had to be positive about Steve, even knowing I was going to trade him, and Troy was uncomfortable about it because Steve won a national championship for me at Miami. So, I remember that.
Were people shocked? Walk me back through when the supplemental draft. I don't know what it was like back then. Even now, it's not a big deal.
It wasn't a big deal then either.
Okay.
There was no going to New York and shaking Pete Rozell's hand, the commissioner at the time, like Troy Aikman did. And everybody viewed Aikman as the ultimate, franchise quarterback. I mean, there's only draft in history where 4 of the first 5 players picked went to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Only the second player picked, Tony Mandarich, didn't go. And so everybody thought Aikman was just this perfect prospect to lead the Cowboys.
And by the way, explain to me real quick and explain to everybody, why was Walsh in the supplemental draft?
I believe he had another year of eligibility, and he chose not to declare for the NFL draft until after the original draft had already been held.
Gosh, isn't that strange?
So obviously here's Aikman thinking, hey, I'm it. I'm the number one guy in Dallas, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, he's warned by Jerry in previous conversations with Troy. He told me Jerry warned him. Troy was, during the supplemental draft, Troy was driving that weekend up to Oklahoma with some friends to spend the weekend. And Jerry called him and said, hey, Troy, I'm just giving you a heads up. We may draft a quarterback in the upcoming supplemental draft, which Troy didn't even know there was a supplemental draft. And he said, but the guy he told me he was going to draft was Tim Rosenbaugh, the Washington State quarterback. And he said, we're only drafting Rosenbaugh. We're only drafting him to trade him. Well, that's all fine. Troy had no problem with that.
Yeah.
The problem he had was they drafted Steve Walsh, who just won a championship for Jimmy and so many of his Cowboys assistant coaches who are now in Dallas, won championship rings with Steve Walsh. They never won anything with Troy Aikman. And so that created, I think, a level of distrust for Troy with both Jimmy and Jerry that was really pervasive in their relationship for several years. I don't think Troy trusted either one of them for a very long time, and this was the primary reason why. Not to mention, Troy ultimately gets hurt, and the team goes 1-15, and the one game they win is won by Steve Walsh at Washington as the starting quarterback. So it was a very uneasy situation for Aikman to have to endure. It definitely affected his relationship with Jimmy Johnson. And I think Jimmy drafted Steve Walsh with the idea of creating value and trading him for more than he had spent on him. At the same time, I know he was not immediately sold on Aikman early in his career. As a guy who was going to, for example, be what Dan Marino was to the Dolphins, or a franchise quarterback who was going to deliver championships, which is what you're expected to do when you're drafted first overall. So I thought all of that was really interesting. As for how it pertains to what the Cardinals wind up doing, Jimmy said you can't let your past mistakes, create fear from getting your guy. The interesting thing about what the Cardinals are doing, and we don't know if they do draft Murray, if Rosen will still be on the roster for a certain period of time or not, as was the case with Aikman and Walsh. But it's just a weird situation because it almost represents a huge organizational failure to evaluate, target a guy in the draft like they did last year with Rosen and go up and get him at 10 from 15 to spend all that and then turn around the next year and take the number 1 overall pick and draft another quarterback. And you're doing it primarily to accommodate Cliff Kingsbury, the new head coach who has never coached in the NFL and was a loser as a head coach in major college football.
This is the one thing I wanted to run by you, Ed, is something I talked to Mike Lombardi, the former the Cleveland GM, and had been with the Raiders and everything. He believes, even now, as we are on the eve of the draft, that Cliff Kingsbury was hired much like McVay, someone you covered, you've gotten to know Sean McVay, was brought in to try to fix, I don't know if fix is the word, but get Jared Goff, optimize a guy that they took number 1 overall, get him to the next level. He still believes that Cliff Kingsbury was brought in to take Josh Rosen and do what McVay did for Jared Goff for Josh Rosen. And so there are still people, even as we sit here, and some people are so convinced that Kyler Murray is going to go number 1 overall, they still believe there's a chance the Cardinals that Josh Rosen is their guy, and that a lot of this stuff has been smoke screens and all that. So this is a very unpredictable draft in a lot of areas, and it starts with that number 1 overall pick.
Yeah, I mean, I found it hard to believe at first that the Cardinals would do what we're talking about, spending the number 10 overall pick and a move up to get Rosen, and then the very next draft use the number 1 overall pick on another quarterback to replace him, and presumably trade Rosen for less than market value. But if you look at it, what the Cardinals went through last year, they had the worst record in the NFL. They started a rookie quarterback in Rosen. They suspended their general manager. They fired their offensive coordinator in October, played 10 different offensive line combinations. And, Rosen had a horrible year. I mean, he didn't have a lot of talent around him, but they were across the board bad on offense. He ranked last in yards per game passing, had the worst passer rating in the league, and according to Next Gen Stats, he threw into tight windows on 22% of his passes, the most in the NFL. So he didn't have open receivers. He wasn't well protected, and I think that's the reason a lot of people really think that this guy can still play. And it'd be interesting to see if somebody makes any considerable investment in acquiring him rather than taking a chance on drafting whoever the second best quarterback is. But I think, Michael Bidwell, He wants to do something to energize the fan base. He wants to do something to sell season tickets and luxury suites, and putting Josh Rosen back out there isn't that thing. The thing that would do that is Kyler Murray.
Yeah, and one of the most dynamic quarterbacks we've seen in a long time, and obviously put up enormous numbers. Isn't it interesting?
I talked to two of the best quarterback coaches in the league at the owners' meetings, Sean Payton and Andy Reid, and both of them had no misgivings whatsoever about Kyler Murray's size. I think he'd be just the third quarterback under 6 foot tall to be drafted. Russell Wilson and Baker Mayfield being the other two. No misgivings about his size, no apprehension about his style of play. In fact, they think that's the way the league is going, so he'll acclimate quite easily.
The only thing I would say to that, the only thing I would have misgivings about is watching his time at A&M. His dad, and I watched him when I was a kid or in high school, his dad was an unbelievable player at Texas A&M, unbelievable quarterback. He was difficult to deal with for Kevin Sumlin. In fact, he and Kyle Allen, who were vying for the starting position, both ended up transferring out of there. He did not handle himself in a very mature way there. And then at this last, you were there, you were at the Super Bowl, and you saw some of his, I don't know if you'd call it antics. It was just a strange, he went on Dan Patrick, and he really wouldn't talk. And there were strange, awkward silences. The one thing, I don't really so much am concerned about his on the field. I think he has unbelievable ability, athletic ability, unlike a lot of people we've seen, and a huge arm. I mean, just a live arm. But from a leadership standpoint, I guess what I would say is completely different animal to Baker Mayfield. Now, that's not all bad. Baker Mayfield was an in-your-face, crotch-grabbing SOB. I mean, that's kind of who he was. He was more of a Bobby Lane throwback, let's go out drinking with the boys, come follow me, and I'll lead you. Fortunately, he values football and loves football way more than like a Johnny Manziel, who let the other stuff get the best of him. It worries me a little bit that Kyler Murray, in college, you don't have to always. You can kind of protect guys from interviews. They can have a certain amount of interviews. He won the Heisman, so in some ways, yeah, he was on a big stage, but he wasn't constantly doing interviews. He wasn't. He only had to do it for 1 year, and he put up big numbers. I'm more worried about some of the off the field, some of these kind of leadership type things with Kyler than I am his on-the-field play.
Which would make putting him in a locker room with Rosen more untenable, I think. But how do you – I understand your concern, but isn't that balanced out or even overwhelmed by his record of winning everywhere he's been the starting quarterback, whether it's at Allen High School or it's at the University of Oklahoma?
Yeah, but it didn't happen at A&M. I mean, I know that was just the one season he was there as a freshman. That was a bad period for him. I mean, he did not. I mean, the way he acted. I'm just saying, I look at Mahomes. I look at Goff right now. I look at Wentz. I see a guy in Kyler Murray that is still, like, we were talking about helicopter parents and that kind of thing, still heavily under the influence of his father. Now, would he be the first guy that has Archie was in control of Eli's future. We've seen it with other quarterbacks over the years. Elway's dad was heavily involved.
Was in the organization. Elway. Yeah, he was in the organization, actually.
Yeah, so we've seen dads be involved. This one, I'm just saying, is big time involved. And we've seen what that looks like in the NBA with this kind of nutcase LeVar Ball situation. Kevin Murray is a little bit it doesn't want to be that public, but he's a strange guy. I'll just say that. I mean, he's more reclusive. He's not going to be out there trying to come up with his own shoe brand or whatever that the Balls are doing. But this is going to be fascinating to watch, and we're doing this show today basically in the shadows of that stadium where Kyler Murray was the star. Frito, is that right? Was this stadium built by the time Kyler Murray was? Oh, it was the old stadium. Now they have it holds like 20,000. They had a little issue with the foundation, but they've got that thing all shored up now. But Kyler Murray did it here, and now he is in Nashville getting ready to possibly be the first overall pick.
And Cliff Kingsbury's been trying to make him his quarterback for about 7 years now. And the amazing thing is, if the Cardinals do this and they make Kyler Murray the number one pick, which I expect them to do, it's remarkable the faith that they're showing in a head coach who has never coached at this level and didn't win at the level he's coming from. And you're right. You're right. I think your point earlier was right on the mark that normally an organization that drafted a quarterback 10th overall and made the investment they did in Josh Rosen is trying to find a coach who wants to work with this guy and can make something great of him. And Kingsbury has spoken highly of him, just as Jimmy spoke highly of Steve Walsh, for the purpose of building his trade value. But he's been over the moon about Kyler Murray's potential in the league. And Lincoln Riley, the head coach who's with him now in Nashville for the draft, has talked about the fact there's nobody in football who's ever played the quarterback position like this guy can play it in the style of play that is becoming more and more popular and more the norm in the NFL.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be a fascinating way to start the draft, and then we'll get into whichever Bosa. You realize the Bosa family, they've been producing first-round picks going back
They're the Mannings.
Like generations. I mean, I feel like there's a grandfather involved. Well, there was a great-grandfather who was in the mafia, but he was Al Capone's guy. But the Bosa family. But the dad was a number 16 overall pick. There was a brother-in-law of the dad's and now both brothers. And I think Joey just signed an extension or something. I mean, he hadn't been around long, but he's really good. Joey,
third overall pick with the San Diego
correct.
Chargers. Yeah,
and then
so I believe
Nick comes along.
The history that will be made when Nick Bosa is drafted, presumably second by the 49ers after Murray goes first to the Cardinals, if that all holds true, is that they will be the first family to have a father and two brothers drafted in the first round, other than the Manning family. Peyton, Eli, and Archie.
Boy, very interesting point. I can always leave it to you. The Gronk had a lot of brothers that got involved, but the dad wasn't an NFL player.
Wasn't a first round. The brothers weren't first round picks either. We're talking about first round picks.
First round picks, yeah. No, nothing really to compare that to, and really, Ed, nothing to compare to our next guest. And you've already on this podcast heard some interesting things from Jimmy Johnson, exclusive to the Doomsday podcast, talking to Ed earlier. Now we talk to one of the preeminent voices in the history of the NFL draft. We're so pleased to be joined by Rick Goose Gosselin, one of the legends when it comes to covering the draft. And he's been held by his, big-time people like Bill Belichick. I mean, basically giving Goose credit for putting him on to Julian Edelman. And in fact, Ed Werder, Goose was on the first Doomsday podcast we ever did. We didn't know where we were headed. I think you were still with a different organization at the time, perhaps. And we didn't know what was going to happen. And we had Goose on. And
should I tell Goose the bad news?
Okay,
the good news, Goose, is we're still producing podcasts. The bad news is our guest fee is less now than it was then. So
I say the bad news. This is the last one you're going to do. I do the first and last.
That's right. We were flush with cash then. No, we are. We're in the Frito Nation production studios, the Palatial Studios, and of course the Talk of Fame network that you can hear Goose on a lot of affiliates across the country, and he does a great job with Clark Judge and who's your other
Ron
guy?
Borges.
Yeah, Borges.
Ron Borges.
Borges is on there as well, and always stirring things up in that New England.
I may be applying soon.
Yeah, I think Ed becomes a free agent soon, although not from the Doomsday podcast. I take it. I tell you, we were sitting here going down memory lane with Ed. Ed reached out and talked to Jimmy Johnson earlier, Goose, and Jimmy. Tell him a little bit, Ed, what Jimmy did that'll kind of frustrate Jerry as always. He with taking, just making sure he gave himself full credit.
So the reason I reached out to Jimmy, Goose, was just kind of the similarities in what the Cardinals are dealing with at the top of the draft if they take Kyler Murray after just drafting Josh Rosen. There's not a direct comparison. Nobody's ever done this before, but as close as there is was the Cowboys with Steve Walsh and Troy Aikman. And so one of the interesting things that Jimmy said was, I knew I was trading Steve, and I got a 1, 2, and a 3. So Obviously, he's taking full credit for that, acquiring that player and for getting what they did out of that, and therefore he'll be waiting a little longer to get in the Ring of Honor when Jerry hears it. Anyway, so what went through your mind after the Patriots won the most recent Super Bowl, and Bill Belichick is talking about the credit that you deserve for bringing to their attention Julian Edelman, who was a quarterback at Kent State at the time, and nobody knew where he should play or if he could play wide receiver in the NFL to the extent that he has?
Yeah, I wasn't at the press conference, but I was in the Super Bowl city, and my Twitter lit up after he said that. I was both surprised and shocked because I've never told anyone who I talked to during my draft research. You know, everybody knew I talked to all 32 teams, but I never identified anyone I talked to. And Belichick essentially was the first person to out himself as a person on my network. But I talked to these guys. You know, I talked to most GMs, head coaches, and, you know, especially the couple weeks leading up to draft, I may spend an hour, hour and a half on a phone with a GM or a head coach going through the whole board. And I remember that specific day, I had gotten the times, the 40 times, and then the workout times from Kent State. And I asked Belichick, I said, did you hear what the quarterback at Kent State ran? And he goes, no. And I said, he ran like a 4.48. I said, you know, he's an option quarterback. He's not going to play an option quarterback in the NFL, but, you know, worth taking a look. And he says, I wasn't aware, and I'm going to get on it. And I bet you by the end of the day, he knew he had Julian Edelman wired. But I probably talked to a dozen teams about Edelman.
So the Cowboys could have had Edelman? Is that what you're saying?
Give Belichick credit. He's the only one that drafted him. But the great thing about Belichick is when I talked about Edelman, he envisioned him as a late-round pick, as a special teams guy, a guy who could possibly return kicks. He sent Scott O'Brien in to work out Edelman after we talked and asked him specifically, Scott, see if he can catch a punt. And he was looking at him as a punt returner. And here's a guy that was going to come on to, you know, hopefully make the team, hang around a couple years return guy. But he developed into an elite receiver. And that's, again, a credit to the Patriots. Belichick drafted him, and their coaches developed him.
Was there a similar situation with the Cowboys ever where you felt like they took a player largely on information that you provided them?
Oh, I know I talked to some people in the Cowboys about DeMarcus Ware. And I know the big talk now was DeMarcus Ware and Sean Merriman. And I said the difference is his character. I said, DeMarcus Ware, you draft him, and he's going to play there for 10 years. He's going to be probably a 6-time Pro Bowler, and he's going to be a good citizen in the 10th year as much as he was in the first year. And there were some concerns about Merriman's ego. And I said, one of the notes I gave the Cowboys was that the moment Merriman makes a Pro Bowl, you're going to have a problem. You got a lot on your hands at that point. They have made an impact on them drafting Ware. I don't know. Right.
Yeah, well, it worked out pretty well for them. Yeah, exactly. And I've seen when, for people that don't know this, when Goose will come out to like a rookie camp, Jerry will always make like a beeline for him. And it actually impacted, I think Jerry was always wanting to know what grade. He
wanted Goose's approval.
Well, yeah, but he wanted to know what grade Goose was going to give him. And forever, Goose would always give him like a C- or whatever. And while it didn't make, I don't think he ever got that mad at you. Did he ever express frustration with you, Goose, that, hey, I think we deserved a little higher than that?
No,
or was he more interested in what the reasoning was for your grade?
There's no logic in draft grades immediately after draft. You know, I graded all 7 rounds. I assigned a point value to all 600 players on my board. And at the end of the day, I added up the point values of the players they drafted and then divided by the number of picks and came up with a number, then graded on the bell curve. But I usually gave out 1 A+, 2 or 3 A's, maybe 3 or 4 B's, and then 20 some C's, because by and large, every NFL draft turns out to be average. So I don't assume anyone's going to have a great draft. I'm assuming everyone's going to have an average draft. If you do a little better, you get a better mark. If you do a little worse, you get the C, the D's, and the S. And back then, you know, everybody thought I hated the Cowboys 90s. I gave them, you know, a lot of C's and D's on drafts. That's because those drafts were C and D's. If you look back, those drafts stunk. That's why the dynasty collapsed. And yet people say, well, he hates the Cowboys. No, I was grading the draft, and they were terrible.
Did the Cowboys ever, or any other teams ever, let you see their board before the draft?
I've seen some boards. I won't tell you who, but I've seen some boards before drafts. And I told one team, boy, you got way too many names on this board. I said, most teams have 120 names. Some teams have as few as 90 names on a board. This one team had 300 names. And I said, the more names up there, the more confusion you're going to have. And I think that team has long since weaned its board down to a more reasonable number. I talked to, the night before the draft, I generally went to a Broadway play just to get away from it. And then I'd get back to the hotel, and I'd be on the phone for 2 or 3 hours because my mock at that point would be in print. And I'd have coaches and GMs saying, who you got so-and-so taking, and where did this guy go, and stuff like that. But and I know my top 100 board was in the overwhelming number of draft rooms because that board was so accurate. I mean, I think I did the first one in America in 1998, and I had, I think, 85 of the top 100. And every year I did it, for 10 years in a row, I had the best top 100 in the country. And every year I did it, I had between 80 and 90 players. So it was pretty accurate. I know some teams did the day before mock draft using my top 100. So it was credible information. The mocks, of course, I had pretty good success at mocks. My best mock was 1998 when I hit the first 12 picks and 18 of the 31 were direct hits. I don't know that was sheer luck. You won't see a mock like that again. You don't see 12 in a row. There were no trades. Once there's a trade, the draft heads off in a different direction. But that's why they're called mocks. It's all guesswork. Even my stuff was guesswork.
Yeah, but it is interesting that we now have these amateur film jockeys who love to, oh my gosh, I've looked at all this film. But what you always did, you talked to so many people and you had this network that you checked in with. Now, walk us back to the very first time you were doing this. Was anybody else besides you? You said you were maybe the first person to do the top 100. What about the mock draft? So was it like you and Kuiper and Dr. Z? Was it just about like 5 of you guys out there?
I mean, I'm sure Ed did these too. When I was in Kansas City covering Chiefs, we did a mock every year. But it was always just throwing names out there. In '92, when Dave put me on as the NFL writer, he said, "I want you to grade drafts." And I figured, well, if I'm going to grade drafts, I better know what the heck I'm talking about. So my network started at that point, and I called friends that I'd known coaching and scouting and stuff, and started talking to people and starting building a consensus. And in my last draft in 2011, I had a network of 130 people, NFL employees that were basically sharing information with me. And then that's why the board was so accurate. All these guys now, they watch tape. I didn't watch a single shred of tape. I wasn't a scout. So I talked with people that did watch tape, that did scout, that did this for a living, that actually had to make calls in the draft. And people say, well, Gosselin doesn't watch tape. Well, that's right. Gosselin's a writer. He's not a scout. and the league knew that my mocks and my top 100 wasn't flavored by my opinions. All it was an NFL consensus. A lot of teams viewed me as the consensus board, and that's why they were so good with sharing information. They wanted an accurate consensus on how the draft was going to go.
What was the biggest draft lie you were ever sold?
I didn't really get a whole lot of draft lies, frankly.
No?
I mean, the stuff that I got was always credible, and they knew it. My deal was, if you share with me, I'll share with you. I'll read you the write-ups I have from other people. No one knew who I was talking to, but they knew I was talking to. I would read the write-up. I mean, I had DeMarcus Ware and Sean Aaron. I had a full page of comments from different things. But if you share with me, I'll share with you. And there were a couple GMs I knocked off. I stopped calling. You're not going to share? I don't need you.
Well, I did not have the same good fortune you did. The biggest lie that I was ever told, and my sense of this is that this is a time of year where lying requires no apology or shame. Most of the year, people either won't blatantly lie, or if they do, they at least have some guilt about it. This time of year, I think not so much. And so I remember in 2001, when I was at ESPN, we covered not only the team we were with, but we had 4 or 5 other teams we were assigned based on the relationships that we had. And so I had the Saints. And in 2001, Jim Haslett was the head coach. And I finished a phone call with him, and at the end of it, he volunteers. He says to me, there's 3 guys I just don't see it in. In other words, 3 guys he doesn't get why they're potential first-round picks. And I said, well, who's that? And I don't remember the other 2, but the first guy he said was Deuce McAllister.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, Deuce, I never heard that before. So I called the GM of the Saints, Randy Mueller, at the time. I said, what do you think of Deuce McAllister? And he said, I think he's Fred Taylor. Fred Taylor's a great back, in Jacksonville. So I knew Haslett was lying, and I knew that the Saints must really be interested in McAllister. And, of course, ultimately, they took McAllister, even though they gave up their whole draft, or Mike Ditka did, 2 years earlier to draft Ricky Williams. The first number 1 pick they took after Ricky Williams was Deuce McAllister. So that was the biggest lie I'd ever been told. Fortunately, I didn't believe it.
I want this, and I never once did I ever ask a team, who are you going to draft?
Right.
But I had talked to people in all the buildings for 2 months, and I got a pretty good read on how teams felt about players on the draft board. And at the end, it was a matter of me knowing the team needs, me looking at my top 100 and trying to fit players that fit the need. And it really wasn't rocket science. It was fairly simple. I never, people say, somebody's feeding him information. I never once did I ever ask anybody, who you taking with your pick. It was all just common sense, matching a team with a need with a player in my mocks. And that's probably why not many people lied to me. I didn't give them a chance to lie to me. And now it's ridiculous. I know I had a couple of GMs call me this week just to see how I was doing, and it's amusing stuff that's said and the stuff that goes on. The one thing I'll say is you shouldn't listen to a thing you hear this week. Trust all the research you did leading up to last Sunday. Trust that, because now it's as you said, it's the lying season. This last week is the lying season. And there's a lot of it going on right now.
Did you have an opinion on, like you said, you had to give the Cowboys some bad grades over the years. Obviously, the Cowboys have struck out in trying to replace Witten for a lot of years and have missed there. Did you ever, I remember you writing, or maybe, you and I used to spend a lot of time together at the Morning News. There were certain
together, Matt.
Exactly. Although I rarely showed up.
Did Matt have a draft board?
the Mosley draft board. But like you used to like Ron Wolf, for instance. Like there were certain teams that were unbelievable, like in the 4th round. It always amazed me that you kind of had a sense of what that was. When it comes to the Cowboys, since that's what we do, we talk the Doomsday podcast. Was there did the Cowboys seem to lose their concentration sometimes, like 4th, 5th, 6th rounds? I mean, obviously we're talking about the era that is the, 7 rounds. What's the most sort of common error that the Cowboys have made over the years?
Yeah, I think the Cowboys in the 90s considered the late round draft picks as throwaway picks. Let's take a flyer and this guy, take a flyer and that guy. And you look at Ron, I thought Ron Wolf was the greatest second-day drafter in history. He drafted so many Pro Bowl players in rounds 4 through 7. He had an Adam Timmerman in the 7th round, a Travis Jervey back there, Antonio Freeman. They were still drafting ability, not taking flyers. They wanted the draft guys had a shot to make the team. The Patriots taking Tom Brady in the 6th round, and then keeping 4 quarterbacks that year. No one kept 4 quarterbacks that year. He kept Brady that 4th year because he wasn't going to lose that guy. So that's the Cowboys, I thought, were just throwing too many darts out there, just taking flyers on guys at the back end of drafts. And that's all been fixed. I mean, Will McClay, I thought Tom Siskowski kind of got it on track, and now Will McClay has got it more focused. But through the 90s, it's amazing how they just kicked away those back end picks. And I've always said, historically, the second day of the draft was rounds 4 through 7. And rounds 4 through the second day is what made a good draft great. We can all draft good in the first 3 rounds. You know all the names. You've seen all the stars in college football on Saturday afternoons. But rounds 4 through 7 is where you find the real diamonds. And the Ron Wolfs, the Ozzie Newsomes, the Belichicks, that's where they make hay. They're still focused on drafting players that can help them, not taking flyers.
One last thing for you. If Kyler Murray at 5'10" and a quarter or whatever he is, which was surprising to some people that he was actually over 5'10", if he had to come along, say, 10 years ago, would there be any shot of him being mentioned at number 1 overall, or did Russell Wilson's success really kind of lay the foundation for a guy like that? Or is he so dynamic that he would have been able to transcend these sort of
prototypical
NFL
quarterback measurements?
Exactly.
No, because there was a guy like him in the early 90s. Same situation, guy named Charlie Ward at Florida State, won a Heisman. Like he was 6'1". He also had the NBA. And he said, if I'm a first-round draft pick, I'll play in the NFL. And Minnesota let him pass through at 17. He slid out of the first round, went on, and I think he had a 10-year NBA career. But he was Charlie Ward. I mean, he was Kyler Murray. I mean, he was a dynamic passer, runner, winner. He had all the intangibles Russell Wilson had, and all the intangibles that Kyler Murray had, but he never got a chance because he didn't fit the prototype. I think Russell Wilson, Baker Mayfield last year, these guys are proving you don't have to be 6'4", 230 to play quarterback in this league. I mean, the ball comes out so quick now. Quarterbacks don't take the big. If in the right system, the quarterbacks don't take the beating that they once took. Those 7-step drop guys that got hit from the blind side. I think Kyler Murray has a chance to be special because of that. That ball's not going to stay in his hands, and if it does, he can scramble, he can run. And we saw that a little bit in Cordell Stewart. I think he's got a shot. And you guys are right. If this was 10 years ago, we wouldn't be talking about Kyler Murray in the top of any draft. And 20 years ago, he'd be a baseball player.
And 10 years ago, maybe Julian Edelman would have been an option quarterback in the NFL rather than a wide receiver / special team long shot.
Let's take it back further. Tony Dungy was left Minnesota as the Big Ten's all-time total offense leader. And he was a safety coming in. He was a safety going out. They were not going to give him a shot at quarterback. And there's a lot of great African-American quarterbacks that never got a shot that Kyler Murray is going to get here and Russell Wilson got. And that's sad because I think there are a lot of great quarterbacks that will end up playing wide receiver or defensive back in this league.
I knew Goose would somehow get it back to Dungy. No man, Dungy loves Goose. I know that for a fact, and I don't. That goes way back. Goose, thank you very much. How do you consume these things now? Do you just kind of sit there like the rest of us and kind of sit back and listen to all the analysis and enjoy it? Do you still break out the notebooks and
colored pens,
or do you just kind of
stopwatch out?
Will you have a beer and just watch it like a lot of folks? How do you yeah, how do you or do you even watch the whole thing now that you don't put in all the time that you used to?
I'll watch it and I'll still chart it. I think I still find it interesting. I've done no research. I haven't made a call. My deal was when I called NFL people, I would share. I always have something to give them in return. They'd give me something back.
And now you have
I
nothing
haven't
to give.
researched it, so I don't bother people with phone calls because I've got nothing to give them. But I've got a board in front of me. I got 600 names on a board in front of me. I took the guys at the Combine, the guys who played in the All-Star games, the guys who made all-conference, all-American teams. I got 600. I'll know the names when they draft, and I'll watch the draft. It's still fun. And I do miss what I did.
Yeah.
I mean, it was fun knowing every player in the draft and knowing and saying in the 5th round, that was a good pick for that team. Knowing why teams took players in even the 6th and 7th rounds.
If you could send us a copy of that board, I think that might help us going forward. If you wouldn't mind. I may
come out there and watch it with you. I want to see if we have the same 600 names. I'm interested.
I don't have as many Baylor names as you have. Okay.
This is a draft in the 4th round. People need to take the best Baylor player available. That is kind of what needs to happen.
That's what I used to say about Michigan State players.
That's right. The best Michigan State player available. Listen, we appreciate it, and just know, and I think you do know this, but you're still valued. People still write stories about you. I saw one on Monday Morning Quarterback just the other day. Someone was writing, I think it might have been Jenny Vrentas or one of those folks, basically like the evolution of all these things. And, of course, they started with the father of the mock, Rick Goose Gosselin. So we really appreciate it, and thank you for joining this very special draft edition of the Doomsday Podcast.
Thanks, Goose.
All right, that was fun having Goose Gosselin. So many great stories, and I love that Goose still sits out there, even though he doesn't really need to anymore, with 600 names in front of him, and he will know everybody that's brought up. Ed, one of the things I wanted to bring to the table, you've brought so much today. I thought, what can I do to get us ready for this thing.
I kind of wondered that myself.
Yeah. But other than just,
I wonder that every week.
that's not fair. Okay, there's a lot.
Just trying to be funny.
I know, and you are. You're a funny guy. Have you caught any of the new Matt Mosley show in Central Texas?
I think I was the first guest
Austin,
on the Matt Mosley
Waco.
show. Have you already forgotten?
No, you did a great job on that. I'm just making our folks aware of that.
Oh, I see.
TuneIn Radio.
Yourself.
TuneIn Radio, the TuneIn Radio app. If you put in ESPN Central Texas, and you can listen to my show 10 to noon, Monday through Friday. Okay, Ed, I want to look at this number 58.
I can't believe you worked that hard. 10 to noon? You worked 2 straight hours?
It sounds easy, but you got to still fill some time there. But here's the deal. I've looked at a lot of the players that could possibly be around 58. I've called some of my people across the league. Some of them are actually still returning my calls. I thought that there were some cryptic things that came back. I reached out to a couple of GMs today on the whole Kyler Murray front, and it basically somebody said back to me, I said, what do you think they'll end up doing? Talking about Arizona. And they said, I think they'll take the person that fits Kingsbury's system the best. What does that mean? I mean, now when they say take, I think they're saying that's either Rosen, obviously, or Kyler Murray. But I thought that was kind of cryptic. Were they saying that Kyler Murray's a lot better fit, or that he'll work with Rosen? I wish we could decode some of these things. But that was kind of the cryptic one that I got from one NFL GM. They'll take the player that best fits Cliff Kingsbury's system. So we'll see who that is.
Well, if they don't take Kyler Murray, this is one of the most elaborate smoke screens we've ever seen.
Yeah.
Because Kyler Murray's agent is the same agent Kingsbury has. And when Kyler Murray made a recent draft visit to Arizona, he brought the agent with him. So I think this is a formality, unless somebody makes a ridiculous offer for the guy.
Yeah, and maybe that's what they're still trying to attract. Okay, so who are the Cowboys going to take at 58? That was one thing. For years, I have been, as Dr. Draft, my alter ego, I have been able to nail those first-round picks. Boy,
this is usually the round they let Jerry have. This is usually where Jerry takes some drug-addled player or some cripple who might never play in the league or walk again. Now he's done all right. I gotta give the man credit.
I know he's hit on
getting
some
Randy
of these.
Gregory and Jalen Smith. I mean, you can say Gregory was still not a good pick given the investment in him, but and all the suspensions he has served, and another right now, but he definitely got it right on Jalen Smith.
Yeah, this is the best drop foot available strategy that the Cowboys have employed over the years. Okay, here are some names to look for. I used to give 3 locks, and if I could give 3 locks in the first round, I would usually nail one of them. One year, I was talked out of Tyron Smith. 2 months early, I had Tyron Smith. Nobody else had him. And then the day before the draft, whatever Hazlitt, or that you were telling that story earlier about Deuce
Something
McAllister.
like that happened to you.
Yeah. But I went ahead and fell for it. I took him. I basically took him off my out of my pick. But I had him there at number 9 for a good long while, so I still want partial credit for that. Okay, here are the players that will be there at 58, or I should say these are the players the Cowboys are hoping to have the pick of. Okay, these are the top safety prospects. Jonathan Abram, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson out of Florida, Taylor Rapp out of Washington, and then out of Virginia, Juan Thornhill. These are the safeties that have been showing up there.
I think Thornhill and Rapp are the 2 guys who have been most often associated with the Cowboys pick and are players of interest, and were among the 4 safeties who visited the Star in the lead up to the draft.
The problem is in our old guy, Stretch, who's looked at a lot of these guys. He's concerned about a lot of these guys being like 5'10". Chris Richard, the Cowboys defensive coordinator or defensive play caller, think about those old Seattle cornerbacks and safeties. Now, Earl Thomas wasn't the tallest guy, but he was
Chancellor
very physical.
Was, and Richard Sherman was, and
tall, angular, long arms, guys that could get physical with you.
Browner.
Yeah.
Was the other corner.
Gardner-Johnson, known for his ability to anticipate route combinations. Some of this is coming from my buddy John Owning at the Dallas Morning News. He's got some good stuff out. Also, quickness, had a great short shuttle. You love a good short shuttle, Ed. This is a guy I want you to look at hard at this Gardner-Johnson out of Florida. I just think he's someone the Cowboys have their eye on.
I think he's interesting because I think there's some question about whether he's a slot corner or he's a deep safety. He doesn't really play a physical style in the run, so he's not going to be in the box, and I wonder how willing a tackler he is against running backs and taking on a blocker. But he does have versatility in terms of playing the pass because he can be like a Darren Woodson was. Now, he's not big and physical like Darren Woodson, but Woodson, what made him unique was he was a safety who could play slot corner on third down.
Yes.
So there's a lot of value in that type of player, but I'm not sure he's the fit they're looking for on the back end.
Okay, and by the way, people were asking me the Aggie tight end that could go around there, Jay Sternberger. Would the Cowboys be interested in him? I am told by basically a lot of folks, including Stretch, that this man doesn't block well at the point of attack and just really blocking's not a strength of his, which would make him a good fit for the Cowboys at tight end. No, I think
that didn't stop you from loving Rico Gathers.
Rico's fine. He's a big, healthy man, and will continue to be part of the plans moving forward. Now, as you get, I'm not going to try to go all the way through the draft, but one name that keeps coming up for that number 90 pick. Now, there's been a couple. If one of those defensive ends, there are some edge rushers that could start getting moved down there because there's going to be a run on them at some point, and so that'll be interesting to see who they like at 90. There's a local guy, Michigan's Max Crosby is an interesting name at number 90. He's a local kid. Cowboys have taken a long look at him. Defensive end out of Eastern Michigan.
So you got to wonder, why would they consider a defensive end? They just signed Robert Quinn. They just signed DeMarcus Lawrence to a long-term contract. Randy Gregory's future is uncertain. Taco Charlton has been a huge disappointment as a first-round pick from 2 years ago, was a healthy inactive several times last year, which means they were using game time to try to motivate him to perform to their expectations during the week. That's why they would consider taking a defensive lineman. And I think there's also a couple guys who have first-round grades and even high first-round grades. Montez Sweat is a guy who could fall I don't think he's going to fall to 58, but has a heart issue that could cause teams to be alarmed, and he could fall. And
I bet Jerry's already tried to do a contract with him if he's got some kind of medical.
There was a player who blew his knee out getting ready for the combine who's a defensive end, I think from Mississippi State, who's a highly regarded player who would also fit the kind of Jalen Smith scenario where you redshirt him for a year and then have him after that. But I think
you need somebody that can come in here and play. I sure hope they don't do any sort of redshirt deal. This Jalen Smith
is waiting for Jalen Smith been worth it?
It has. But I think they're at a point right now where they can't afford to be waiting around. And by the way, that was a miracle. Kudos to Dr. Dan Cooper because they had to regenerate his nerve, basically.
This injury is not that serious. Now, I don't know about the heart condition. Most people say that he's still on everybody's draft board or most draft boards, but that would obviously be as serious as what Jalen Smith faced. But a torn ACL isn't. It's just a matter of time, really. But I think you're on to the right positions. Because I think if you look at safety, the expectation of, the Cowboys fan base was that they were going to sign Earl Thomas or, Eric Berry to play safety, and instead they signed George Iloka. That's obviously a temporary solution if he plays at all. And every player in the Cowboys secondary of note has a contract that either expires after this season or next, and specifically the guy they're trying to replace is Jeff Heath, who, according to Pro Football Focus, led all safeties and missed tackles against the run last year. So Gil Brandt said that this is the best draft for safeties that he's ever seen. Stephen Jones said safety is a position where this team has devoted the fewest assets. And worth noting, the Cowboys haven't drafted a safety in the first 2 rounds since they took Roy Williams way too high at 8th overall in 2002. So it's been an incredibly long time. And then I think
at the time we didn't think. I think if Woody had been able to go a few more years, Roy had some good moments early.
I think the draft came at just the wrong. It was the wrong year to take him because the game changed, because the rules changed, and it became a passing league, and he was a box safety.
Yeah,
who was hopelessly out of couldn't compete with the best receivers in football and the best quarterbacks in football.
And then they took the horse collar away from him. That was
his best contribution to the game, I guess.
Some of his best
work.
And
then I think tight end is the other position. You mentioned the kid from Texas A&M. There's a lot of good tight ends in this draft, and the Cowboys had 15 years to acquire a capable replacement for Jason Witten, and they failed. And now that he's unretired, I don't think they can let that happen again. They should draft the tight end position like they don't have Witten, like Witten didn't come back. And what his role winds up being remains to be seen. I mean, everybody's talked about he's not going to be on the field for every snap. Well, the last time he played in a Cowboys uniform was 2017. One tight end in the entire league played more than 1,000 snaps that year. It was Jason Witten.
My goodness.
So I wouldn't trust that he's not going to be a huge part of it, especially, given that they really never replaced him last year. Blake Jarwin was their best, most productive receiver at the tight end position. He ranked 29th in the NFL in receptions and 27th in yards.
I would mainly, if you're preparing for the second, third day of this draft, I would just look over the Boise State players, and you're going to at least take two of those guys. I mean, this team is infatuated with Boise State players. Okay,
5 or 6 of those are either on the coaching staff, Kellen Moore, or on the roster.
Third-day wide receiver that I want you to keep an eye on, that I've done some research on, and mainly because I saw all his home games and all his games on TV.
This is going to be a Baylor player, isn't it?
Jalen Hurd, wide receiver, used to be at Tennessee, was a running back, put up big numbers, huge numbers at Tennessee, decided to transfer, decided he thought he would have a longer career and could be more durable as a wide receiver. And so it's rare to see it. But he's so tall, he's just under 6'5", he's 6'4", has a huge catch radius, so he was a tall, big running back, reshaped his body, and can high point a football. And so he'll be he's still relatively new to the position, but he had to sit out a year out of Tennessee, so he got to work on a year, like a redshirt year, and then last year had almost 1,000 yards, got in the end zone quite a bit for Baylor, and Jalen Hurd is his name. He is a much better route runner, even though he hasn't been doing it, than some of those guys that Baylor was putting out in the Bryles years. That really...
The first-round picks?
Corey Coleman was one of them that's just bounced around, and it hasn't worked out for him. I did reach out to Matt Rule for our podcast. He said of Jalen Hurd, elite work ethic, size, competitive nature, elite mentality, and they said he's faster than the time that he put up in the 40 because he hasn't been able to get healthy enough. He put up like a 4.6, which doesn't get you that excited about a wide receiver, but there are people who believe he's one of the best day 3 wide receivers who will be on the board and someone the Cowboys will have an interest in.
And another position, I guess, that I'd speak to last is running back. Obviously, they're not going to have Rod Smith be the primary backup to Ezekiel Elliott, who they just extended to the 5-year contract with him. So he is under contract for 2 more seasons, and then what they do after that remains to be seen. He'll be, 5 or 6 years into his career by that point. That's a lot of carries at the running back position, but he may be the unique guy who can do a 10-year career with one team at running back, but the Cowboys only have a certain amount of money they're going to be able to allocate with presumably big money contracts coming yet for Dak Prescott and Amari Cooper and maybe Byron Jones. So that remains to be seen. But running back's another position where they could use another player who would probably make a minimal contribution, given that while Elliott's missed a lot of games through suspension, I guess 6 total, he's never missed a game because of injury, and he's been amazingly durable and productive, winning 2 rushing titles in 3 years.
And by the way, just a transaction, you saw that the Cowboys picked up that
That's what I was trying to say.
Option on Zeke Elliott.
The 5th-year option.
For $9 million.
So I don't see Zeke playing next year for $9 million if Dak Prescott's getting $20 million and Amari Cooper's getting $15 million and Tank is making $20 million. I don't see Zeke playing for $9 million.
What's he going to do?
When he's their best player. He won't report. He'll hold out. He'll do... Well, Emmett finished his contract and then couldn't agree on contract terms with Jerry, but I suspect we would not see him in camp if he was not making more than $9 million 2 years from now.
Maybe this... taking this complimentary back that you're talking about will be important down the road. Yeah, and David Montgomery's a
like
name.
Sherman Williams did with Emmitt Smith, or Derek Lassick did when Emmitt Smith was out. Same thing.
And when Hambrick showed up, he obviously put a lot of pressure, and he basically ended Emmett's career here because he was so good.
Him and his brother.
What
do voluntary mean?
That's one of the great moments in Cowboys history. That has been our NFL draft preview show. Ed, anything else? I mean, an immense amount of notes that I'm looking at down there that you've taken. Anything else you wanted to hit? I mean, this is we're past the 1 hour mark, and that's fine. I mean, we've had a lot of big time important information to share with our listeners. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Or do you feel like you've conveyed everything?
I feel like we've given people enough to think about, even though we haven't named a lot of names. I think we're done.
Okay, and also keep in mind Derek Thomas, another cornerback, long, angular, tall, a guy that Chris Richard could covet on that third day of the draft. And I'll let you
being the operative word there.
Yes. It is the Doomsday podcast. You've heard from Jimmy Johnson on this show today. You heard from Rick Goose Gosselin. And then what we'll do after the Cowboys draft, we'll do a wrap-up show, and we might even go out there. Last year, one of the more popular shows was actually going out and visiting with some of the Cowboys, the new rookies, and getting some one-on-ones with them. We hope to do that for you guys. Appreciate everyone who's been a part of this. Frito Nation Productions out here in Allen, Texas, does an amazing job for us. Ed, thought you brought it today. I know you got some radio work for this sad little station over here to go take care of. Appreciate everything you do, Ed.
Thanks, buddy.
Okay.
Enjoy it.
That is the Doomsday Podcast, Draft Edition. Everybody have a great evening.
It's one thing falling in love with a house, picturing yourself moving in and calling it home, and quite another navigating the world of price negotiating, mortgage lenders, and finding the budget that works best for you. An agent who's a Realtor can make understanding that world easier. Realtors have the expertise, access to proprietary data, and tools to help you get from imagining living somewhere to actually doing it. That's the kind of help we can provide. Because that's who we are. Realtors are members of the National Association of Realtors.
You haven't heard about the McCrispy yet? Well, then, you probably haven't heard the sweet silence after the first crispy bite either. Go try it for yourself to hear the best not sound you've ever heard.